didn't start thinking I want to make a deck and sell a deck. Like, it wasn't from there. It was more like, well, I'm doodling and I've created these illustrations. I would really like a deck. Like, that would be fun. I wonder if anyone else would. So I'm going to share a few cards, see if anyone wants to give me any feedback. I was probably a bit stubborn. It didn't take much feedback on.
Isabel, welcome to Wild Muse. I'm very excited to talk about your new Breath Cards deck, which is on pre-order. It's coming out with Sounds True. I want to go right back to the beginning, like before they even were cards. So really, what inspired you? And was it that you were inspired straight away to put this information in a deck of cards?
The inspiration was always from illustration. So I mean, it started from, I was already teaching yoga and I was doing a teacher's pranayama course on how to teach pranayama, and this was early in the pandemic. And because it was a teacher's course, we were given information of like, here's a practice, you've tried it, now teach it. And so it was a very quick turnover from like, oh, I've just heard of this technique and I've tried it once and now I'm going to share it with another teacher. And I just found that we did have some notes, but it was all very text heavy, and it was really hard to share a practice as a teacher to anyone when I was looking at text. It was like, I can't really read the text and also communicate it in my own words. And yet I was also maybe just a bit anxious of getting the practice wrong and being, I want to remember what the pattern is. You know, are we inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth with a loud ha sound? You know, like what's the core of the practice? And so it was purely from doodling in that course of like, right, I need some sort of shorthand. I need a little scribble, little illustration and like 3 words that will give me enough about the practice that I could glance at it and go, okay, cool, that's what I'm teaching, and then trust myself to bring the practice to life from it as a teacher with new words. So that was like how the illustration started and why there was even an idea. But then why cards? Sometimes you don't know when the ideas come from. And I know there are yoga cards. They exist, but I don't have any yoga cards. I did have a lot of tarot card decks I just really enjoyed playing with, particularly Kim Cran's The Wild Unknown. There's these beautiful animals and animal energies. So maybe subtly I was sort of influenced by that. But really quickly, actually, I became cards of like, oh, this is cool. The course had two types of breathing in a way, like breathe more and breathe less. Like, so right, I've started off with 2 categories of cards and I'm just doodling around and finding a way to give them a little bit of life, but keep them simple, because I felt like simplicity was so important.
This is so great because it's such a perfect illustration that often we end up creating something that we actually create for ourselves.
Totally.
We are our first reader, we're our first audience member. So this is such a perfect example of that. And I love that you say that they started off with 2 categories, the breathe fast and then the calm it down, because that was the other thing I was really curious about, Isabel. So you've got 57 techniques in the cards, and then it's organized into 4 categories. You've got,
that's right, 4 categories.
Calm, energize, release, and wild.
I know, because of this podcast.
So how did you go from, I'm doing these illustrations because I'm really appreciating the visual, and it makes so much sense, rather than having all that text when you want to do a body-centered practice, it makes sense to come out of words and come more into what you're sensing and what you're seeing. So how did you go from images are really useful, there's 2 different categories, to, okay, there's 57 breathing exercises and 4 categories?
Yeah, that's probably where my analytical nature really came in. So before doing, well, in parallel with doing all of this breath and yoga and coaching work, for a long time I was working in the corporate world with project management, data analytics, things that were pretty analytical and structured. Loved a good spreadsheet. So it did take a while of gathering practices and then trying, like, how do I want to organize them? Because I could have made more categories. In a way, sometimes I get tempted with the calm category. It's the biggest one. I've got about 30 practices in that. Maybe I could have had calm and balance. But like in my body, I feel like balance does feel quite calm. And at some point, you need to keep something simple. If I went for 8 categories, I think people would get confused by that. But 2 just didn't feel enough, because like if you're gonna like look at all the darker emotions, let's say like anger and sadness are the 2 most common emotions that we can recognize but often want to reject. Like they just don't fit into calm or energize. Like there was no way that they were going to, and it wouldn't have felt right to me to carry on ignoring those emotions that I would often ignore myself. So they needed a home, and that's what became the release ones. And then wild, honestly, it's just like wild card in like 2 ways. If one is like, if I just don't know how to otherwise categorize it, then it needs something. It needs an other bucket with a better name. But also there's the sense of like, it's just unusual. And like within wildness, we've also got connection, like practices that are in pairs, for example. So a connection to another as well as a connection to yourself. And I couldn't, maybe there are 2 practices that are connections in pairs. I wasn't going to make a category just for 2. So the wild category is a lot of other weird, wacky, wonderful things, including connection, and also the other bucket.
And as I'm listening to you, I'm getting the sense that you had to know these practices. Like you were saying, calm and balance feel like they're in the same category to me. So again, it's such an example that sometimes we can start to create and want to share our knowledge before we've had enough time to really get to know it ourselves.
Yeah, that's true.
And also, I love the fact that you kept coming back to simplicity. You mentioned that at the beginning. You mention it again with this question, because I think that's another area that us creatives can really struggle with. You've got that beautiful analytical other aspect, which many of us creatives don't. A spreadsheet can actually make a lot of us break out in a sweat. So
it's my total like, oh yes, I love to draw, but the spreadsheet, it's so organized, it's so structured, it's so safe. I don't know.
Yeah, so can you give us a sense, like walk us through how you respond to that intuition of this needs to be simple?
Why does it need to be simple? There's a famous quote, but I don't know who said it. It's too famous. But it was around, sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have the time to make it shorter. And like that idea really stays with me. And also probably my corporate training, we were encouraged often to go down to simplicity, particularly with if we're making apps or we're making analytical dashboards. Like we would know from a user experience point of view that simplicity is important for adoption. But also I suppose I like the simplicity. If I can make it simple, then I'm going to remember it, then I'm going to practice it. Great, you can build up the nuances and the complexity once you've got the simplicity. But I think if you don't give enough simplicity, like it doesn't take root. It's almost like a tree, I suppose, where the knowledge tree has got to start with a few really big branches, and that's the simple side. 3-4 branches, easy. And only once you kind of got that can the rest of your knowledge and the details like really fan out. But
yes,
why? I'm not sure. That's kind of the logic reason of why, but I don't know why that came to me as like it is so important. It just feels like it is. almost like it's a universal truth in my world.
No, I would really agree with that. And I suppose I'm curious about it because I'm seeing it more and more, people wanting things to be more simple, people wanting things to be more minimal. It feels like a real reaction to our times, and almost like a strong energy that's coming from the earth that's beginning to guide us.
Suppose you've got just so much information around, like whether it's breathwork practices, how many teachers are there, loads, yoga, but anything, there's just so much bombardment that I think when we're bombarded, say, by social media and like hundreds of emails a day, we probably then got even less tolerance and patience to like take in a little more complexity. Like when the world's complex, we need to make our things even more simple. But I don't think they have to stay simple. I think it's just they need to take root in a simple form. And then once an idea is rooted, then we can grow from it. But it can't even take roots unless it's simple enough to land.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, I love what you mentioned about the letter, because that's a reminder that suggests don't worry if it doesn't come out simple. You can then spend time to make it simple.
Yeah. Like it definitely takes time to simplify something. But you've got to know it so much better to make it simple.
In terms of this idea of the simplicity, but then branching out into complexity, what I also love about the cards is you've got the techniques, then you've also got the categories that we mentioned, but then you've got sequences, right? Because there's this belief, it's like, what you're teaching is sometimes it isn't just one practice, sometimes it's the accumulation of doing a few things that then create the benefit. So talk about how you created the sequences.
Well, just before the sequences, actually, one more useful thing to note is that the cards are also labelled from foundation to intermediate to master level. There's a little indication in the top corner. So that's another way people can approach it, of like, okay, well, what kind of energy did I want? Do I want to feel calmer or more energized, for example? But also, like knowing where you can start. You can start with the foundation ones if you know nothing, so they're even more simple. And then on every card, there's also little points around evolution. Because I was thinking, okay, I can start simple, but why not hint at 3 or 4 ways in which someone could then evolve it themselves, so that you can stay interested. But again, it's always a like working up to add the details in. But onto your question around the sequences, so that's actually a new addition. So I previously self-published the card deck, assuming that people would themselves be quite comfortable picking out a few practices, like, I'm going to start with the breath awareness right now. I'll add in the belly breath and then Kapalabhati and come back to breath awareness. And I realized that was actually quite a challenge for people, at least when they were starting. Great for a teacher, maybe a new yoga teacher, for example, that already knows a little bit and wants to further develop. But it was too much. I want these cards to empower people to choose something that feels right, but even that takes time. I think people still will need a little bit more support, a little bit more supportive coaching and showing the way of, okay, this is how it looks. So people were asking me, like, could you like share some sequences? Could you show me how to put them together? I'm not sure which ones need to go first. So, okay, well, I can share principles of it. There is no like total right and wrong way. It depends how you feel and depends like how you want to feel. So anyway, I decided that I've made 5 sequences, and I've got them here. 5 sequences for like different occasions. I'm looking to remind myself all their names. So we've got empower, we've got sleep, so it's fairly obvious, we're at the end of the day, to awaken, early morning things, to balance, and I don't know what the other one is. I haven't got the card to hand. Coherence. And so these were really, people could just pick it up and go, okay, that's cool, I'm just going to stick exactly to doing that, or go onto my website and I've got some guided practices with them. So then that's another level of support. But ultimately it's just to give some ideas of how you might put your own things together as you advance and get to know the practices, get to know like what just really works well for you. Like what's happening in your life is totally going to influence what sort of practices that you need, or you never need anything, but that feels good, that feels beneficial for you in life.
I'm going to put a pin in how you mentioned that the original deck when you self-published didn't have the sequences, but now that you've been working with Sounds True, that feedback came in, because I want to come back to that collaborative element. But I first want to just touch on the illustrations, because obviously you shared the story. This started with you just jotting things down in your own training. So what was the creative process like to bring about the final illustrations? They're hand drawn, they look really gorgeous. Did you work with an illustrator? Give us a bit of a sense of that.
Yeah, some of them are the original ones that I just hand doodled. So I did it on my iPad. It was, which app was it? I can put it in your show notes what app I use. It was a fairly simple drawing app on my iPad, which I love because you could layer things up. And the really the original ones were mostly like a nose with then little like arrows, and I color coded the arrows depending on whether it's an inhale or hold or an exhale. So like there's also a systematic part of what colors I was using. That was just how it naturally sort of showed up. I was doodling and could make it. And I suppose as it's evolved, I've just had fun going, I needed an arty outlet. Like this was how I could let my artistic side come out. And I started making slightly more creative and different illustrations. So there's a variety of illustrations, but I did them all myself.
Gorgeous. And also what I'm getting from that, Isabel, is the illustrations, there wasn't this sense of how can I make them impressive or how can I make them good. It was much more, they're functional. So really functional things like the inhale is going to be coloured one way, the exhale is going to be coloured another way. So really, again, coming back to that simplicity of they have a very clear role and how can they fulfill that role, but then also but now I need this artistic outlet, so now I'm just going to have a bit of fun as well.
Yeah, it's true. I hadn't thought of it of like the functionality being the most important thing, and it was. And yeah, maybe I've just allowed myself to indulge a bit in some of the fancier drawings. I'm looking down at the deck now to see what's a bit fancier. But I don't know, there's a chakra one, for example, but even that I feel is fairly functional, because I'm saying, like, pointing out on the body like where the places of introspection are and giving indications of colours and sounds that are associated. So actually I still think it's all pretty functional. Yeah, I chose function over beauty, but there was enough beauty or charm in its beauty, I think, to hold itself.
Lovely. Okay, so we'll come back to this, the whole agent and the publishing process, but I want to just really think about someone who's watching this now, Isabel, and they may have an idea for a creative project like this. Mm-hmm. What were the steps that you took? Because now you can look back on it retrospectively and you can sort of you can sort of look at the steps in a neater way. So what were the steps that you took to take the idea into the fully realised deck? And of course, this would have been the first one that you self-published.
Yeah, so the process was I probably made about 20 cards. Like, I didn't finish the whole deck straight away. Made about 20 illustrations that I was wanting to use myself. Printed them on on normal paper. I was saying A4 paper, but I mean it came out the size of the cards because they actually were always this size. But anyway, I just printed it on average printing paper, cut them out, and sent them to a few friends. If what do you think of this? Like, do you think this would be of any interest? And they were like, yeah, it looks really cool, well done. I mean, we're in the pandemic, I suppose, so maybe they were looking for entertainment. But it started that small. And maybe it didn't start thinking I want to make a deck and sell a deck. Like, it wasn't from there. It was more like, well, I'm doodling and I've created these illustrations. I would really like a deck. Like, that would be fun. I wonder if anyone else would. So I'm going to share a few cards, see if anyone wants to give me any feedback. I was probably a bit stubborn and didn't take much feedback on. I remember people did give some feedback. Oh, we'd really like to see a stamp for how long it needs to take. And I was like, no, going to ignore that. And yeah, so just literally posted a very small subset on very low quality printing paper just to get the first indication of would anyone else like it. And I think as soon as I got, maybe that was 10 people, it wasn't loads. As soon as I got some yeses, that just really helped me commit to finishing the project of making a deck and printing at least a version for me. It still was like, I just want it ultimately, but now other people say they like it, I like it even more. I needed social proof for myself to finish it, I suppose, there. And actually finding somewhere to print was quite easy. So I know that people make their own oracle decks, for example. And so I looked at where do they get them printed and found this great company that's based in Cambridge in the UK. It's called Ivory Graphic, and they print playing cards, game cards, custom card game type things. And so it was actually like, wow, cool. I could just print one set for like 30 quid. That's fine. I mean, you're not going to make a profit if they cost £30 every time you print it. But in terms of like, I would just want to have a deck, I couldn't afford to spend £30 on printing it on professional card paper. So great, like the project can go ahead, you know, like there's no roadblock that stops it. And knowing that I could print it just sort of carried on. I think I asked them for a template, actually, the template of the size that I wanted, just to really make sure that the cards would fit, because once you get into these detailed designs, it's quite hard to change the shape of the page you're working with. Like, to change the card shape would like be a big design challenge. So yeah, worked with the card manufacturers just to make sure that they had a card that would fit, which we did. Then just it became a project of get going, how to learn to use. I used Adobe InDesign for the cards. It's like, okay, how do I make templates so that I could keep everything in the same place and not have to like replicate too much. So that again, even that was a little bit, how do I keep it simple? How do I keep it consistent with using templates and design software I'd never used before?
I love this because, again, you're still talking about the fact that it was for you. We've come from you in that teacher training course wanting a clearer way so that you could teach in the way that you wanted to teach, with no obstacles, with no anxiety about getting it wrong. And then here you are you're still doing it for you. But there is that part of you who's like, I wonder what other people would think. But even then, that was still just making you more confident about the fact that it was a good idea to do this for you. Yeah. And it's like, it's such a lovely story to show that creative bubble can be really served by staying in there yourself. Like, you sent it off to 10 people, so you do want that feedback, but you're still just really thinking about, how am I doing this for me? And being guided by that. Yeah,
and I think that made me feel so much more free in making it. Like, I was really surprised. I normally go to bed like 10 at night. I'd be very like, get up early, go to bed early, but I'd be up till midnight, like refining some of the designs, because I was just freaking loving it. I was just having so much fun going, oh no, maybe actually it's a different mudra on this one. Like, it amazed me how much time I put in, but coming from this very deep state and place of joy and flow. In fact, I probably am spending so that was in end of 2020. I think I'm almost trying to find that again, because that 3 months when most of the design work was happening, I mean, yeah, after work, so this was, from sort of 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening into the middle of the night, it just felt so good. It just felt so fun and liberating. I was letting out this creative outlet, and whilst it can't have been a download in the sense of I had loads of books that were giving me the inspiration for the practices, I'd had teachers, I was practicing them, it also did feel like a download, because it's like, how is this happening so easily? How am I just enjoying this process of making something so much? I've never felt that before. And yeah, it was so good. I keep wanting to find it again. But unattached action, for anyone here that sort of knows a bit of yoga, I think that was the most obvious place in my life where I've seen, this is action without attachment to the outcome. Like, I'm just making it because it feels like it wants to be made, and I'm going to enjoy it at the end. If anyone else is going to want to buy it, great, cool, let's just see, but I just don't care right now. This is just a fun place. I'm probably a bit more attached to it now as it's sort of taken root, but that's how it started.
Yeah, and that's so interesting to get a sense of almost like the increasing levels of attachment that have come in, and probably quite comforting for some people who are watching. But yeah, so you printed the deck just for you. So how did it then go from now this deck is for other people as well?
What did I do? So yeah, I printed one deck and was like, oh great, I'm going to take some photos of it, I'll pop it on my website and put up a pre-order list, just see, like, is anyone interested? And I don't remember the exact numbers, but maybe within a few months I got like 20 people or so say that they were interested. So like, okay, well, some people are, great, I'm just gonna print 300 then, and which I think cost me something like $3,500 to print the 300 decks. So I could afford it, and it was from the UK, so I didn't need to do a bigger volume. If anyone wants to print decks, you normally do it from overseas, but then the volume's got to be massive. Like, this for me was about experimentation. And yeah, when people, I think it took a month to print them as well, like a really short time. Like, once I already printed one, I want 300 more, please. So they all got delivered to my house, and yeah, just started shipping them off. I mean, sometimes that was quite inconvenient, I have to say, because I hadn't set it up very business-like. Yes, it was a business website, but once it was sold, I needed to package it up and post it, manually. And if I was away, Mum, could you post a deck off to this address? Or if I was at the meditation centre, 10 days of silence, no access to my phone, I'm thinking, well, I haven't got anyone else in charge of that email address. Oh well, I hope they're patient and I'll have to message them when I'm back. So I left it all quite casual, I suppose.
It's lovely. It just seems like a perfect example of the organic growth of a creative idea, and the incubation of, okay, this is just for me, and then that slow sort of that slow stretching out to see if there's anybody else out there. And so we go from that place where you created 300 and you were just seeing, and your mum was involved, and maybe people had to wait for delivery, and now the deck is coming out with Sounds True. So give us a sense of how that next part of your journey took place.
Yeah, well, it was inspired by being in La Gomera, which is a very volcanic area, and I was walking there with my partner. What year would that be? End of 2022, I suppose. And I was thinking, I just want to do something more. I'm feeling a bit bored. I've gone part-time in my corporate role. It's fine, but sometimes you get that general feeling of stagnation or stuckness of what next in life. So that kind of feeling was there. And he's a writer. He's already published a few books. So why don't you write a book? Like, do something with your breath work. Suddenly he's like, what do you mean write a book? I've already written breath cards. Why didn't I just see if they could get published? Because I didn't really realise that I was self-publishing. I was just printing something I'd made in my mind. And then suddenly, oh, I suppose I have self-published something. Wonder if a publisher would maybe take it on and help it get a bigger audience, maybe refine a few things with me. You know, obviously I spotted a few typos in it. Oh, that'd be nice to change in the next version. And so then there was a little bit of a, do I get an agent or not? Or at least try and get an agent. And so that was interesting. It was bits of conflicting advice. I have an uncle that works in publishing travel literature. And he was like, no, definitely don't get an agent. But then he knows the industry really well. And I'm like, I don't know anything about the industry. JS, my partner, had an agent. He thought the agent was pretty useful. And in the end, I landed on that probably getting an agent would get me a better deal. If I could get an agent, then I'd probably get a better deal. So yeah, I'd need to pay them, but it's like getting a slice out of a bigger pie. And ultimately, you don't tend to get rich making a book or publishing anything. It's more about publicity and also sharing something that you think other people would love and benefit from. So the idea of it being a bigger pie was like, that sounds better. I don't mind getting a bit less from it as long as it gets a better reach. So that was just my hunch, my bet, that's why I thought that was a good idea. And whether it was useful or not, to find an agent, I figured I wanted an agent that had done card decks before, because they're a bit more niche than books. I'm honest, I don't know if that was important, but my thinking was, I'm going to go for card deck agents. And so I just looked at who are all the people that have made card decks that I think are really great. So Kim Cran's made The World Unknown. Who's her agent? Go on her website. Can't remember now, but it was on there. And then you've got Gabby Bernstein. She's done card decks. Who's her agent? And so that's how I went about it. Just like picked up the 10 decks I got, Googled around, who are their agents, wrote an email, like a few paragraphs. Of course, I crafted that intentionally, but I didn't write an essay. And attached a few copies, maybe about 10 cards. So not the whole thing, but a digital version, like a PDF of some of the cards. Just say, hey, I've already done this and would like to bring it out into the world and see if publishers are interested. Would you work with me? And the next day I got one yes, which was quite like, wow. Of course, the yes isn't like signed straight away. The yes is like, I'm interested. Let's have a conversation and explore. So did that and got the formal offer of a contract, but decided to wait a month just to see in case any of the others got back. Because I was like a kid, like, yay, someone wants to work with me. And in fact, it's this Michelle Martin, who's Gabby Bernstein's agent. She's like, she wants to work with me. This is so cool. But also just, okay, I don't have to sign straight away. Like, I am excited. She said yes. I'd love to work with her, but let's see what else might come through. So that was quite hard, actually, to wait that month just to see. And in that time, probably had approached 8 agents, got 1 no, 1 yes, and the others never responded. So I was like, wow, that's just such an easy decision then. Yeah. Like, I'm really happy with the yes I've got. I've waited the 1 month. Patience, tick. Let's go.
Yeah. And also,
is that common from like what you hear of people like looking for agents? Because for me, this was an entirely new process. So it might be unique to me, but you might spot a pattern that's helpful for anyone kind of thinking.
I certainly think what is a pattern is looking to see who's representing the kind of thing that you're doing. Like, that's an absolute massive tick, Isabel. And you did that intuitively. You basically said you had around 10 decks just lying around. And I think that's so huge, because I know there are creatives who are creating work, but they're not consuming similar kinds of work. And that can actually lead to a little bit of a struggle, because you then end up wanting to collaborate with someone but not knowing who, because you're not consuming other artists who are creating the same kind of thing. So that's great that you had those decks and you were able to just literally pick them up and be like, okay, how can I follow the breadcrumbs to the agent? And then in terms of how long it takes, I don't know about decks, but it can be up to 3 months before you hear anything back. Mm-hmm. It's great that you got that yes the following day. Like, that is magical.
Whoa.
Yeah, that really is wonderful. And when you had the first meeting, what kinds of things, so before the signing and, you know, it became official, what kinds of things did you talk about? What was that meeting like?
Gosh, I almost can't remember. It was a bit around like the breathwork world of like, is how big is breathwork? You know, like people know of yoga, like how much of a field, what's the breathwork landscape like? And in a way, Michelle, my now agent, was like trying to convince me that she knew a bit about this world. So like we were testing each other and also showing off to each other. So she was sort of showing off a little bit, like, I know some of this stuff, and I think it's really cool. And then I was also, I guess trying to work out what could she do. Like, I'd not had an agent before, so like what would she do? So kind of getting clear on the process was part of it, of like, okay, so if I'm your client, what next? It's like, well, we'll need to write a big pitch document and you'll write it and I'll help you with it. And so we get clear on what the roles could be. It was just getting a sense of, are we reliable people? It felt very much like, checking each other out as people. Could we work together? Are we who we say we are? Can we speak with confidence? And can we talk about the worlds in which we're in?
I love the sense that not only were you trying to sell yourself, Michelle was trying to pitch herself to you as well. And then, of course, she mentions the pitch document. So again, because it's really important to know who the cards are for. And there's a little bit on your website to show that you've got an understanding of who these cards will be for. But I can see that you've almost like covered all your bases, because you've talked about athletes, but then you've just talked about almost like regular people who will get benefit from the cards. So walk us through what you had to put across in the pitch document. And part of that will have been about who the cards are for, right?
Yeah, and like some of the information on my website around who I think are for, I'm like copy out of my pitch document and put it on my website, because of course I made the deck initially for me, and I got, I'd sold nearly 300, but I didn't know a lot about my customers then. I knew some of them were yoga teachers, but you got their email address, what country they come from. Like I wasn't super close with them. So I had to kind of go through the process of who do I really think these are for, and how doing my best guesses, and also using what I could from who's interacting with me on Instagram, who are the people that I know, who are the groups of people others talk about breathwork being for. So, I was definitely inspired by other authors, including James Nestor and Patrick McEwen, of how they're using breathing techniques. So working out and describing explicitly the types of people that it's for was a big part of the pitch document that I needed to create. Getting even clearer on the breathwork landscape, like it was a pandemic time, or coming out of the pandemic, and breathwork was certainly growing. So I was looking up facts and figures about like how big is breathwork, how many people are searching for it, and kind of seeing it as the new yoga. And so the breathwork world. Then you've got the people, finding comparables as well. That was something I needed to do, something that was realistic, but like the slightly motivating, or the slightly sunny side of realistic, of course. So that was a bit of fun, like Googling around to see, like, is there anything I haven't yet seen that I actually think that this is somewhat like, which for me was yoga cards, for example. Okay, I was aware that they existed, but I hadn't bought any. But they had some really big numbers of like 75,000 decks sold, and like, okay, cool. Like there's an example that gives you some information around like what was the level of interest in those yoga cards. So that was a piece.
And that's often where people can struggle, actually. So I kind of want to pause there, because if you have created something that is entirely new, you know, you're saying that you found a comparable in a yoga deck, but not necessarily a deck that was teaching pranayama techniques. I mean, of course, there will have been pranayama, in the yoga. So I think it's that slightly creative thinking that says, okay, this is going to be a good comparable to suggest how many sales these breath cards could potentially have.
Yes, that's a good point. So I was aware that there were things on cards, but that breathing techniques on cards I hadn't seen before. And I think I put 4 comparables in. My high pitch was Breath by James Nestor. Like, everyone's heard of this book. Breathing's popular was kind of like my angle there. Then it was these yoga postures on cards. So it's not breath, it's yoga, similar people, but it's still one thing on a card. So that was a good comparable also because it had those specific numbers. I could see some sales information. I then used another tarot card deck that I just really liked, so Kim Kranz's Wild Unknown, so showing how the illustrations were really valuable. And I did another breathwork book from someone I think it was Stuart Sandelman's breathwork book, Breathe In, Breathe Out by memory. That was like, okay, this is a UK author, so it's like it's not the big scale of James Nestor, but like, someone that's like somewhat a peer. So that's what I use for it. So they were always like, slightly on the optimistic side, but each comparable, I would justify why. I would say, write a sentence around, this is what's similar and this is what different. So, yeah.
And that's interesting because, again, and I'm pausing a little bit around here because I know this is an area that can be challenging for people. This is often what someone would have to do if they have, say, a non-fiction book and they're trying to get an agent. They would have to put their comparables. And what's really interesting, I love the way that you've described it, because you were using breath cards, but it was helpful to give a couple of books just to show there's an audience for this. And also I love your thinking that you were like, okay, I've got James Nestor, which is huge, but I'm also going to put a UK author in just so that they get a sense about how it's selling here, because obviously you're based in the UK. And then the kind of almost like the wish list comparison and then the practical comparison as well. Because what's happening is someone's receiving that and you're giving them as much help as you can to help them understand how they're going to sell you and how successful they're going to be when they sell you. So that would have been really clear for them.
Yeah, because I don't know whether... Because I know what the publisher would have picked comparables, and I don't know whether they stuck with the comparables that I gave them or whether they made their own comparable list. I have no idea. But, it was certainly part of the pitch deck, and Michelle needed it in there, and I think I could see why it was a good idea.
And so, of course, we know how this story ends because you've now connected with Sounds True. So again, how did that happen? There was obviously an expression of interest and there meetings before there was an official yes. Walk us through that.
Yes, everything you said. So I think Michelle sort of drip fed over a couple of weeks who she was contacting, so that the first preferences that we both had would go first. And Sounds True had replied with we're quite interested, maybe within about a month. Like, it wasn't as quick as Michelle's the next day, this is great, let's talk. But I think it was about a month before we got a yes. We had definitely had a couple of no's, with people going, card decks are just expensive, it's a low margin on card decks, like we're not doing card decks at the moment. Post-pandemic, they didn't have as much money or whatever their reasons were. So we got quite no's from a business point of view. And then once Sounds True were interested, I was like, great. I wanted either Sounds True or Hay House was going to be like my number one choice. So really happy when they were interested.
And let me just take you back to when you got some of those rejections, because it sounds like you got the rejections before you heard back from Sounds
Yes.
True. So
Yeah,
how
I
did
think
you,
we did. I think we got
how
a
did
couple
you
of notes
navigate?
before we got a yes.
How did you navigate that in terms of how those rejections made you feel and how you stayed hopeful? Did you stay hopeful?
Yeah, I think probably because the agent, Michelle, made me more hopeful. She's like, it's totally fine. We always get some no's. I think she also held them back a little bit until until a few days later. Like, it wasn't straight away. But she was totally fine with it. She didn't seem worried. So it's like, oh, if she's not worried, I'm not worried. I mean, until that point, an agent, I haven't paid an agent. They get part of the the royalties or part of the advance payment. So the point of we're making this pitch document and it's taken about 6 weeks. Michelle's reviewed it twice and given me her comments. Like, she's worked for free on that part. So obviously she wants it to now get sold. Otherwise she's worked and got nothing. And so the fact that she was unbothered, I was like, fine, it's clearly part of the process. She's been in this game and I haven't. So let's keep going. I think if I had directly contacted all these publishers and they were saying no direct to me, and I didn't have the context that that was pretty normal, that might have been more upsetting.
Yeah, because actually when I think about it, because you heard back from Michelle the following day after you put those submissions out for agents, you had 24 hours. And then already you were given that validation that somebody wants this. So you didn't have to be in that interim place of, oh God, am I the only one who wants this deck?
Maybe because she said yes so quickly, it was more okay that the publishers are taking their time. Maybe, I don't know. It didn't seem like too big a deal. Obviously, after about a month-ish, I was like, "What do you think? Are we going to get something?" She's like, "It's cool. We've still got some of the best that haven't responded yet. So hold on."
And actually, that's lovely. It's something to take a lovely amount of hope from, that just because it's taken them a month doesn't mean that they don't like it. It's often that the bigger people have got more of a list of submissions to get through, so it actually takes them a month to get to your submission versus they got it a month ago and then they've just been sitting with it because they haven't been bothered to respond because they're not that excited.
Yeah, true. Could be that. But also, I was still getting... a lot was happening in my life at that time. So I'd been... after the La Gomera adventure, going, I want more wild stuff to happen in my life, and going, I'm going to get my breath cards published. Wow, an agent says yes. 4 days after Michelle said yes, I was made redundant from my corporate job. It was like, the universe is doing weird things here. I was already planning on publishing it, but now I've also had the rug pulled out from under my feet in terms of comfort, but also an opportunity, because I'd be paid a bit of redundancy money. So, okay, I'm not going to be doing that job soon, and got a bit more time and effort to get into the cards and into me being taking my teaching more seriously. But also it was like, cool, I'm going to redesign this breathwork teacher training program with one of my teachers. I'm going to go hike the Camino de Santiago. So I wasn't sitting at home doing nothing. I was very much like, wow, life is changing faster than I could have imagined. Let's just see how things are going to land. And the first call I had with Sounds True, I was on the Camino. I was hiking the Camino de Santiago. Michelle's like, could you have a conversation with me in Sounds True tomorrow? I know you're hiking, but could you? Sure, I hope I'll have reception. So I walked a bit faster to get to the end of that day's route, had a shower, and there I am at a church/hostel having a conversation around publishing breath cards. And in a way, maybe that's what helps, because the fact that I was living a fairly bold and exciting and authentic, I really am trying to find myself. I really am trying to improve myself. Live an interesting life. I think all that and all that energy, all the optimism, it all just comes through. But I never could have planned that. I never could have planned, I'm going to go and walk the Camino so that a publisher can call me inconveniently on it and like it will work. Like, no, it's unplannable. But I said yes. I was like, I'm not going to wait a week till I'm home. I'm just going to have the conversation now. I got the sense of like, just say yes.
You said, I couldn't have planned it, i.e. it wasn't happening from these rational thoughts up here, but it was much more you going with the flow. The universe had given you an interesting circumstance in your life and you were going with the flow. I want to just end with the fact that you then will have gone back over the cards. Now we get to the point that I put the pin in earlier on. Yeah. So you had the suggestion of making the sequences, which we already know about. And it's funny because you talked about when you sent the cards originally to your friends and your friends were like, can you put a timer on this? And you were like, no, I'm not taking that feedback. So were there any challenges with having to now take a project that you had literally been able to do just for you to then now have to take the advice from a sales team and make changes to your project?
I never actually felt there was conflict. I mean, there were a few things I felt like I needed to fight my corner quite hard on. Like they wanted to change the size of the cards initially to a more standard size US card. That's not a small change, that's a lot. And so I pressed them pretty hard on wanting to keep the same card size. And luckily the art director agreed with me. I guess they could see like, yeah, if you make it narrower, then things take more height and like, yeah, loads can change. And they still gave me quite a lot of freedom. I said, I want to put in sequences and I want to add these new cards. I'm like, fine, you can do any of that. They wanted to change the design on the back of the cards, and so they proposed a couple, and I was really happy with that. I already felt like the original box wasn't great. I just didn't put much effort in the box. I put all the effort on the cards. So I said that to her. I was like, yeah, great. If you can come up with a couple of box designs, like new cover designs, I'm really happy. So they made 2, and I picked the one that I preferred. They wanted to change the font a little bit to make it less handwritten looking and a little bit clearer. Like that wasn't a big deal. I could, for clarity, I agree that clarity and simplicity are good principles. So I couldn't argue on the principle of which they were saying it. Like, okay, fair play. Numbers on the cards, in case people wanted to keep them in the order in which they came in. And I'd never found a way that I could make that look particularly pretty, but they did. They found a really subtle way to do it. So yeah, that's part of their work. And I suppose the bigger change though was the guidebook. We haven't mentioned that. There's a guidebook inside it. And that's where they gave me a bit more editorial help of like, well, we think this section should come earlier. We think this last paragraph of the section on mudras would be better as the beginning bit. And so there was a bit of back and forth, but I really felt like all of their advice was making it better. It didn't feel like they were watering anything down. And so because the cards ultimately stayed the same visual impact, I was quite happy adjusting the words to make them better. So I found that nice. Like it felt good to have someone else proofread it and find a few errors and go, that line's not so clear, how about this way, change the tense of this bit. Like that was good.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And I was interested about the guidebook because that's obviously the most amount of text, so it's interesting to hear that you did get some editorial guidance there.
That was where their guidance was the most, definitely the guidebook.
I've absolutely loved getting this microscopic view into the journey. And I'm curious now, Isabel, as you kind of reflect on that journey and you've got the new deck coming out, what are you hoping for the deck in terms of like, you've got a sense of who that audience is now that you've really gone over your own journey in creating and getting to this point? What impact would you love the deck to have when it comes out?
Partly I would love it, like make a big wave in the yoga teachers world, as like I really think that in yoga we don't do enough justice to how we breathe, A, for general health, but also for like emotional expression and creativity, and yoga off the mat. So I would just love to see more pranayama and more yoga in yoga classrooms, and I think breath cards is a really helpful tool to help teachers do that. So that's like one aspect of where I would love breath cards to do well. I mean, if it could be anything like James Nestor's book of just like, okay, here's the theory, now practice. Because that's the essence of the cards, is to get people to actually practice and to remember to practice. Sometimes I think of James Clear's book of Atomic Habits. Like, okay, external cues are not the only thing that help you make a habit, but they do help. So if you pick 3 cards of this will be a good practice tomorrow morning, and then you put them on your bedside table, and you wake up and you don't pick up your phone, like, yes, I would love people to like be using the cards in that really practical way. And I hope that for those that are like new in their journey, that they would then find my website really helpful with all the videos, and they can come and join the classes and get the tutorials to learn the nuances, and then the cards just serve as that, like, that's the essence of it, and I'm reminded to do it, and I'm gonna go ahead, and I'm not gonna sort of cheat myself out of practice.
Gorgeous. And it's great that you've got those tutorials. So you've got the static card and the information and the gorgeous illustrations, but then people can go to your website and they've got the instruction videos as well, because sometimes a video can be really helpful. So we'll put all the links we'll put the link to your website, which actually also you can then go through that to then buy the cards, can't you?
Yeah.
So we'll pop all that.
All the links. Everything was around easiness, trying to make it as easy as possible for people.
Amazing. Well, that's been so gorgeous. I'm feeling inspired myself talking about cards with you. I definitely love decks, and it's made me think about decks that I really enjoy, but also how they're different to a book, because you can go through them in any order. Like a book, you have to go, well, you don't have to, but a book you tend to just read through, but decks, there's something a lot more interactive about them. So I'm really excited about how this deck is going to do.
Thank you. I'm kind of excited. Yeah, I'm very excited too. And this was fun, reflecting on that sort of creator journey. Like, I hadn't done it often. I hadn't thought about it until yesterday. I thought, oh wow, it has really been quite something.
Yeah.
So thank you for inviting me here and allowing me to have that reflection and share it on as well.